With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Eliza Henderson reluctantly signed the inheritance papers for what seemed to be a worthless island off the coast of Maine, after losing her husband in a tragic fishing accident last winter. The single mother of twin boys had been barely keeping their family boat repair shop afloat. The mysterious island left by her eccentric Uncle Thomas was supposed to be just another burden, a rocky, inhospitable piece of land that had been in the family for generations, but never developed. She had intended to sell it immediately and use whatever meager sum it brought to pay down their mounting debts. But beneath the windswept shores and forgotten ruins of that desolate island lay secrets that would not only unravel the mysteries of her family's troubled past, but would expose a notorious pirate captain's centuries-long deception that had altered the very history of coastal New England. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh April rain lashed against the windows of Eliza's weathered pickup truck as she navigated the narrow coastal road leading to Porter's Harbor, the small fishing village closest to Henderson Island. Her sons, Liam and Noah, both 12 years old, had finally stopped arguing in the back seat after hours of tense travel from their home in Portland. "Are we really staying on the island overnight, Mom?" Noah asked, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he pressed his face against the rain-streaked window. "Just for 2 days," Eliza replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter as wind buffeted the truck. "We need to survey the property and take some photos for the real estate listing. Uncle Thomas's lawyer says there's an old caretaker's cottage that should be habitable." The headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the small harbor town that seemed frozen in time. Weathered fishing boats bobbed in the protected cove, while salt-worn buildings huddled against the relentless coastal elements. Eliza pulled up to Harborside Supplies, the only general store in town, hoping to gather provisions before the final leg of their journey. "Stay in the truck," she instructed the boys as she pulled her raincoat tighter. "I'll be quick." The bell above the shop door jingled as she entered, drawing the attention of an elderly man behind the counter. His weathered face creased into a frown when recognition dawned in his eyes. "You must be Thomas Henderson's niece," he said without preamble. "Heard you inherited the island." Eliza nodded, surprised by the direct acknowledgement. "News travels fast." "Small town," the man replied with a shrug. "I'm George Winters. Known your family for generations." His expression softened slightly. "Sorry about your husband. Michael was a good man." The unexpected mention of her late husband sent a familiar pang through Eliza's chest. It had been 16 months since the Coast Guard had delivered the news of Michael's fishing boat found capsized in a sudden storm. His body never recovered. Some days the grief still felt as fresh as that terrible winter morning. "Thank you," she managed, forcing herself back to the present. "I need supplies for a couple of days on the island, and information about hiring a boat to take us there." George studied her for a long moment. "Nobody goes to Henderson Island these days. Place has a reputation." "A reputation?" Eliza asked, suddenly alert. The lawyer had mentioned nothing about this. "Bad luck," George said simply, beginning to gather items from his shelves. "Your uncle was the last person to live there, and He hesitated, seeming to search for a diplomatic word. "Eccentric." "He was a recluse," Eliza acknowledged. "I barely knew him. He came to the mainland only for necessities. Spent his days digging all over that island." George shook his head. "People thought he was searching for something, but he never said what." This revelation stirred Eliza's curiosity. The lawyer had described the island as having an abandoned cottage and little else of value, just rocky shores and sparse vegetation. What could her uncle have been searching for? "As for a boat," George continued, "my grandson Jack can take you. He's the only one who still makes regular trips past the island for his lobster traps. He glanced at his watch. He should be returning to harbor soon. I'll give him a call. While George contacted his grandson, Eliza collected additional supplies, extra batteries, first aid supplies, and heavy blankets. The store owner's cryptic comments about her uncle had unsettled her, but she reminded herself that small coastal towns often harbored superstitions about isolated places. When she returned to the truck, the boys were wide-eyed with excitement. "Mom, we saw a real fishing boat unloading," Liam exclaimed. "The guys had huge lobsters." "That's probably Jack," Eliza said, stowing the supplies in the back. "He's going to take us to the island." They drove to the small harbor, where a rugged 30-foot fishing vessel was just securing at the dock. A young man in his early 30s, with sun-bleached hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent his life on the water, waved as they approached. "You must be the Hendersons," he called out, jumping onto the dock with practiced ease. "Grandpa called. Said you need passage to the island." "That's right," Eliza confirmed, extending her hand. "Eliza Henderson. These are my sons, Liam and Noah." Jack shook her hand firmly. "Jack Winters. Haven't had anyone ask to go to Henderson Island in years." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We can head out at first light tomorrow. Too dangerous to approach the island in the dark, especially with this weather." "Is there somewhere we can stay tonight?" Eliza asked, suddenly realizing she hadn't considered this part of their journey. "Harbor Inn at the end of the street," Jack replied. "Nothing fancy, but it's clean. Tell Martha I sent you." The Harbor Inn proved to be a quaint bed and breakfast run by Martha Winters, Jack's aunt. The older woman welcomed them warmly, providing a cozy room with a view of the harbor and a hot meal that revived their spirits after the long drive. "So you're going to Henderson Island," Martha remarked as she poured Eliza a cup of tea after the boys had gone upstairs to explore their room. "Looking to sell it, I expect?" "Yes," Eliza admitted. "I can't see any reason to keep it." Martha's expression grew thoughtful. "Your Uncle Thomas was convinced that island held something valuable. Spent his whole life searching for it. Mr. Winters at the store mentioned that," Eliza said. "Do you know what he was looking for?" "Thomas believed the island held a secret connection to Captain Isaiah Henderson," Martha explained, her voice lowering as if sharing a confidence. "The pirate?" Eliza couldn't hide her surprise. Captain Isaiah Henderson was a notorious figure in colonial Maine history and a distant ancestor her family rarely discussed. According to local lore, he had preyed on merchant ships along the New England coast in the early 1700s, before mysteriously disappearing with a fortune in stolen treasures. "The very same," Martha nodded. "Your uncle was obsessed with the family connection. Collected every book, every scrap of information about Isaiah Henderson. Believed the captain had hidden his treasure on the island and that the secret to finding it was somewhere in the family records." Eliza sipped her tea, processing this information. The family connection to the infamous Captain Henderson had always been a historical footnote, occasionally mentioned but never explored. Her practical father had dismissed it as ancient history, irrelevant to their modern lives. Did anyone ever take his theories seriously? She asked. Martha shrugged. Most folks thought he was chasing ghost stories. But Thomas was educated, had been a history professor before he moved to the island full-time. He wasn't a fool. That night, as wind and rain battered the inn's windows, Eliza lay awake, Martha's words echoing in her mind. She had come to the island with a simple goal: document the property, take photographs, meet with a local real estate agent, and put it on the market as quickly as possible. The boat repair shop in Portland was struggling without Michael's expertise, and the mounting bills demanded her full attention. She couldn't afford to be distracted by old family legends. Yet something about the story nagged at her. She remembered her grandmother once mentioning a family archive journals, letters and documents passed down through generations. Had those been among the possessions her uncle left behind on the island? And if so, what secrets might they contain? Morning arrived with clearing skies and diminishing winds, ideal conditions for the crossing to Henderson Island. Jack Winter's fishing boat, the Sea Sprite, was sturdy and well-maintained, easily accommodating Eliza, the twins, and their supplies. "It's about an hour's journey," Jack explained as they pulled away from the harbor. "The island sits just beyond the shipping lanes, which is partly why it's remained so isolated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." As they navigated the choppy waters, Jack pointed out landmarks along the coast, sharing bits of local maritime history that captivated the twins. Liam and Noah, initially subdued by the early morning departure, gradually brightened with the adventure of it all, firing questions at Jack about fishing, boats, and island life. "Have you ever been on Henderson Island?" Noah asked, his voice barely audible over the boat's engine. Jack nodded, his expression growing more reserved. "A few times, helping your uncle bring supplies over. He was private but kind enough. Always generous with his coffee and stories, though most of them were about Captain Isaiah and his lost treasure." "Did you believe him?" Liam interjected eagerly. "About the treasure?" Jack's weathered face creased in a half-smile. "Let's just say I've never seen evidence that would convince me either way. But the island does have its mysteries." "What kind of mysteries?" the boys asked in unison. "Stone structures that don't make sense for a simple fishing outpost. Unusual markings carved into rocks along the northern shore," Jack replied. "Could be natural, could be man-made. Your uncle certainly thought they meant something." Eliza listened to this exchange with growing curiosity. The lawyer had described the island as essentially worthless, a small, rocky landmass with a dilapidated cottage and no development potential. Yet Jack's comments suggested there might be more to discover than she had anticipated. "There it is," Jack announced, pointing toward the horizon where a dark silhouette was emerging from the morning mist. "Henderson Island." As they drew closer, the island's features became more distinct. No more than half a mile across at its widest point, it rose from the sea in dramatic fashion, rugged cliffs on the eastern side, giving way to a somewhat more gradual western slope where a small, protected cove provided the only safe landing spot. Atop the highest point stood a weather-beaten cottage, its windows dark and uninviting. Near it, the broken remains of what might once have been a lighthouse keeper's dwelling added to the island's desolate appearance. "The dock still intact, surprisingly," Jack observed as he skillfully maneuvered the Sea Sprite into the cove. "Your uncle maintained it well. Must have been important to him to have reliable access." They docked without incident, and Jack helped unload their supplies onto the weathered wooden pier. "I'll come back for you day after tomorrow, early afternoon," he said, handing Eliza a marine radio. "Keep this with you. Signal's decent enough to reach the mainland if you need anything." As Jack's boat pulled away, leaving them alone on the island, Eliza felt a momentary surge of apprehension. The isolation was absolute, just her, two 12-year-old boys, and whatever secrets the island might hold. "Come on," she said, shouldering her backpack. "Let's get to the cottage and get settled." A narrow path wound upward from the cove, overgrown but still discernible. The boys bounded ahead, their initial nervousness transforming into excitement as they explored their temporary domain. Spring had barely touched the island. The vegetation was sparse and hardy, adapted to the harsh coastal conditions. Yet there was a wild beauty to the place, the untamed landscape, the commanding views of the endless Atlantic, the cry of seabirds circling overhead. The cottage, when they reached it, proved to be in better condition than Eliza had expected. Weathered cedar shingles covered the exterior, and though the porch sagged slightly, the structure itself appeared sound. A heavy padlock secured the front door, for which the lawyer had provided a key. "It seems Uncle Thomas was concerned about security," Eliza remarked as she worked the stiff lock. "Though I can't imagine anyone comes out here regularly." The door swung open with a protesting groan, revealing an interior frozen in time. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, the cottage looked as though its occupant had simply stepped out momentarily. A coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table beside an open notebook. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with volumes on maritime history, archaeology, and New England folklore. Maps and charts were pinned to nearly every available vertical surface, many marked with notations in a precise scholarly hand. "Whoa," Noah whispered. Uncle Thomas was serious about his research. Eliza moved further into the main room, taking in the evidence of her uncle's obsession. The lawyer had mentioned personal effects that would need to be cleared, but she hadn't expected such an extensive collection. Organizing and packing these materials would take far longer than the 2 days she had allotted for this visit. "Boys, let's check the rest of the cottage and make sure everything's safe and functional," she directed, pushing aside her growing concern about the scale of the task ahead. The cottage consisted of a main living area with a kitchen alcove, 2 small bedrooms, and a surprisingly modern bathroom. Thomas had apparently invested in a rainwater collection system and solar panels for basic electricity. One bedroom had clearly been her uncle's, with more books, a writing desk covered in papers, and a narrow bed. The other contained 2 small cots, as though he had occasionally expected visitors, though Eliza couldn't remember anyone ever mentioning staying on the island with him. "Can we explore outside?" Liam asked eagerly once they had deposited their bags and ensured the cottage's amenities were working. Eliza checked her watch. They had several hours of daylight remaining, and she needed to document the property for the real estate listing anyway. "Yes, but stay together and don't go near the cliff edges." "I'll come with you." The boys raced ahead as Eliza grabbed her camera and notebook. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying the clean, bracing scent of the open ocean. From the cottage's elevated position, she could see almost the entire island, the rocky beaches, the stunted trees bent by constant winds, the peculiar stone formations Jack had mentioned dotting the landscape. As she photographed the exterior of the cottage, Eliza noticed something unusual about the property. Behind the main structure, partially concealed by a stand of wind-twisted pines, stood a small stone building that resembled a root cellar or storage shed. It didn't appear on any of the property documents she had reviewed with the lawyer. "Liam, Noah," she called, redirecting her sons from their investigation of a tidal pool. "Let's check out that stone building." The structure was solidly built of local granite, its entrance sealed with a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Unlike the cottage, this building showed no signs of recent use. Vines partially covered the door, and the small pathway leading to it had all but disappeared beneath encroaching vegetation. "What do you think it is, Mom?" Noah asked, trying unsuccessfully to peer through the building's single dirt-encrusted window. "Probably just storage," Eliza replied, though something about the structure's solid construction seemed excessive for a simple storage shed. "Let's see if there's a key among Uncle Thomas's things." Returning to the cottage, Eliza began a methodical search for keys, starting with the desk in her uncle's bedroom. The surface was covered with research materials, photocopied historical documents, handwritten notes, and reference books marked with dozens of colored tabs. One book lay open, a biography of Captain Eliza Henderson, published by the Maine Historical Society. As she carefully moved papers aside, looking for a key ring or anything that might open the stone building, Eliza's attention was caught by a leather-bound journal placed prominently in the center of the desk. It appeared older than the surrounding materials, its binding cracked and worn with age. Opening it revealed yellowed pages covered in faded ink, the handwriting different from her uncle's meticulous script. The first page bore an inscription that made her heart race: "The Private Journal of Captain Eliza Henderson." commenced in the year of our Lord 1723, containing the true account of my voyage's acquisitions, and the secret which must never be revealed save to my rightful heir. Mom! Liam's excited voice broke through her stunned absorption. We found something weird in the kitchen. Reluctantly setting aside the journal, Eliza joined her sons in the cottage's small kitchen area. They had opened a cupboard beside the ancient wood-burning stove, revealing not dishes or food supplies, but a recess in the wall containing a metal lockbox. It was behind a false panel, Noah explained, demonstrating how the back of the cupboard could slide aside. I was looking for cups and it moved when I pushed on it. The lockbox was secured with a combination lock rather than a key. Unlike the dust-covered surroundings, it showed signs of regular handling, the metal worn smooth around the dial. I don't suppose Uncle Thomas left the combination lying around, Eliza mused, examining the box without touching it. Maybe it's a birthday or something, Liam suggested. People always use important dates for combinations. Worth a try, Eliza agreed. She tried her uncle's birth date, then her grandfather's, then the year Henderson Island was first recorded on navigation charts, 1701, according to one of the framed documents on the wall. None worked. What about Captain Isaiah's birth year? Noah suggested, glancing at the book Eliza had left open on the desk. Since Uncle Thomas was so obsessed with him. Eliza flipped through the biography until she found the information. Isaiah Henderson, born 1686 to a shipbuilder in Portsmouth. She tried the combination, 1686. The lock remained firmly closed. Wait, she said, a thought occurring to her. If my uncle was focused on the treasure, maybe it's the year Isaiah supposedly disappeared with it. She searched the book again. Here it is, 1724. The lock clicked open when she entered 1724. Inside the box was a single item. An ornate iron key that looked far too old to have been crafted in the current century. Attached to it was a small parchment tag bearing a single word in faded ink. Veritas Latin for truth. That has to open the stone building, Noah exclaimed, bouncing with excitement. Let's find out, Eliza replied, her own curiosity now fully engaged. The key fit the rusted lock on the stone building's door, though it took considerable effort to turn. When the mechanism finally released, the heavy door swung inward with a groan that suggested it hadn't been opened in years. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust, old paper, and something else, a metallic tang that Eliza couldn't immediately identify. She switched on her flashlight, revealing a chamber that defied her expectations. This was no simple storage shed. The interior had been transformed into a research space, with walls lined in cedar to protect against dampness. Shelves held dozens of leather-bound volumes, marine charts, and artifacts carefully arranged on velvet-lined trays. In the center stood a large table covered with maps of Henderson Island, many marked with grid patterns, notations, and symbols. But what drew their collective gasp was the far wall. There, partially embedded in the stone, was an ancient sea chest, its wood dark with age, its iron fittings corroded by time. On its curved lid, barely visible beneath centuries of tarnish, was a nameplate bearing the initials IH. Is that? Liam whispered, unable to complete the question. Captain Isaiah Henderson's sea chest, Eliza confirmed, her voice hushed with disbelief. It must be. The interior of the stone building was illuminating solely by Eliza's flashlight and the dim gray light filtering through the single dirt-encrusted window. The beam played across the ancient sea chest, highlighting the corroded metal fittings and the worn wood that had somehow survived centuries of island humidity. Can we open it? Noah asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might cause this remarkable discovery to vanish. Eliza approached the chest carefully, surveying how it had been partially built into the wall itself, deliberate choice that had protected the back and bottom from exposure. "It looks like Uncle Thomas left it exactly as he found it," she observed, noting how the dust around the chest remained undisturbed. "He documented it but didn't try to remove it." She examined the chest's front, where an ancient lock mechanism was still visible despite the corrosion. Unlike the building's door, there was no keyhole instead. The lock appeared to have a complex pattern of movable brass rings. "It's a puzzle lock," Liam remarked, surprising Eliza with his knowledge. When she looked at him questioningly, he shrugged. "Like in that treasure hunting movie we watched last month." "Let's not touch it yet," Eliza decided, stepping back. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. Uncle Thomas must have left notes about this." They returned to the cottage as afternoon shadows lengthened across the island. While the boys inventoried their supplies and prepared a simple meal, Eliza began a careful examination of her uncle's research materials. The journal purportedly written by Captain Eliza Henderson demanded her immediate attention, but she forced herself to set it aside temporarily. First, she needed to find her uncle's own notes about the chest in the stone building. At the kitchen table, she discovered a leather-bound notebook labeled simply "Findings." Inside, her uncle's precise handwriting chronicled his discoveries on Henderson Island over a span of 20 years. The most recent entry was dated just 3 months before his death. March 15th, after comparing the markings on the northern stones with Isaiah's navigational charts. "I am now certain of my theory," Thomas had written. "The island itself is the map. The structures aren't random. They form a celestial alignment visible only during the spring equinox sunrise. Tomorrow, I will conduct the final verification." The next entry was brief. March 16th, confirmed. "The shadow line intersects precisely with the hollow oak." Isaiah was a master of astronomical navigation. "The chest is merely the beginning." Eliza looked up from the notebook, her mind racing. The spring equinox had passed just weeks ago. Whatever her uncle had discovered, it had happened shortly before his death. Had he found something more than the sea chest? And if so, where was it now? "Mom, dinner's ready," Noah called from the kitchen alcove where he and Liam had prepared sandwiches and heated soup on the propane camping stove they'd brought. As they ate, Eliza shared a simplified version of her uncle's notes, careful not to fuel the boys' imagination too much with talk of hidden treasures. "So Uncle Thomas thought there were special rocks on the island that line up with the sun?" Liam asked, his sandwich forgotten. "Something like that," Eliza confirmed. "Tomorrow we should examine those stone formations Jack mentioned." "But what about the chest?" Noah pressed. "Shouldn't we try to open it?" "We need to be careful," Eliza cautioned. "That chest is potentially a priceless historical artifact. If it really belonged to Captain Eliza Henderson, it belongs in a museum, not disturbed by us." The boys reluctantly agreed, though Eliza could see the adventure of it all had captured their imagination. As twilight deepened into night, they settled into the cottage, lighting a fire in the old wood stove to ward off the island's penetrating chill. Once the twins were asleep in the small second bedroom, Eliza returned to her examination of Isaiah Henderson's journal by the light of a solar-powered lamp. The faded handwriting was difficult to decipher at first, but as her eyes adjusted to the archaic script, the words began to flow more easily. The journal's early entries chronicled Captain Henderson's naval career, first as a legitimate merchant captain, then his gradual shift to piracy during the waning years of the golden age of pirates. His writing was educated and precise, far from the stereotypical image of a crude sea robber. Isaiah Henderson had been a navigator of exceptional skill, a cartographer, and apparently, a man with a troubled conscience. June 1723, one entry read, "Took the Dutch merchant vessel Gouden Leeuwen off Cape Cod, cargo of West Indies sugar and French wines. No resistance offered, no blood spilled, thanks be to Providence. The crew treated fairly and put aboard the ship's longboat within sight of shore. This enterprise netted £1,200 sterling, the most profitable yet, but the satisfaction diminishes with each taking. I find myself questioning the path I have chosen. Eliza skimmed forward several months, stopping at an entry from early 1724 that mentioned Henderson Island specifically. February 1724. Having converted the bulk of our acquisitions to gold and gemstones for easier transport and concealment, we have secreted all upon my ancestral island. The men know not the full extent of our accumulated wealth, believing we have distributed all shares fairly. God forgive this necessary deception. The complete cash is too valuable to risk in further voyages. I have designed a method of concealment that none save a Henderson with knowledge of both stars and family history could ever hope to unravel. The next entry caused Eliza's breath to catch. April 1724. Rumors abound that Governor Shute has dispatched a Royal Navy frigate specifically to hunt the sea falcon. Our recent success has drawn unwanted attention. I have dissolved our company, sending the men to various ports with sufficient funds to establish honest lives if they so choose. For myself, I have made the necessary arrangements. The world shall believe Captain Eliza Henderson lost at sea, while The entry ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. The next page had been torn out, and several more were missing. When the journal resumed, the handwriting was noticeably different, more hurried, less precise. August 1724, recovery proceeding slowly. The physician believes the arm will never regain its full strength. Elizabeth tends my wounds with care, though I do not deserve such devotion after bringing this calamity upon us. At least the deception was successful. Captain Henderson is officially declared lost, his ship presumed sunk in the March storms. Yet I fear Whitcomb's suspects. He was always too clever by half. Eliza closed the journal, her mind reeling with implications. According to the historical record, Captain Eliza Henderson had disappeared at sea in 1724, presumably drowned with all his ill-gotten wealth. But if the journal was authentic, he had faked his own death, hidden his treasure on Henderson Island, and then, lived out his life in secrecy? Under what identity? She turned to her uncle's research materials, looking for answers. Among the papers on his desk, she found a family genealogy chart that Thomas had meticulously assembled. It traced the Henderson lineage from the present day back to the early 1700s. According to the chart, the direct Henderson line descended from Isaiah's brother, Nathaniel, who had inherited the family shipbuilding business after Isaiah was lost at sea. But Thomas had made annotations on the chart, including a bold question mark beside Nathaniel's name and a notation. Census records from 1725 show a Thomas Henderson, previously unrecorded, with wife Elizabeth living in Portsmouth. Property purchased with gold coins. Shipbuilding expertise. Missing left arm. Isaiah's new identity? If Thomas's theory was correct, then Captain Eliza Henderson hadn't just hidden his treasure, he had hidden himself in plain sight, assuming his brother's identity and living out his life as a respectable shipbuilder. The implications were staggering. It meant that Eliza and her sons might be direct descendants of the pirate captain himself, not his brother as family history had always maintained. Morning arrived with a brilliance that only islands seem to achieve. The sunlight reflecting off the surrounding ocean intensified the illumination, giving everything a sharp clarity. Eliza had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with sea chests, coded maps, and shadowy figures from the past. She found the twins already awake, peering out the cottage windows toward the stone building with poorly concealed excitement. "Can we explore the island today?" Liam asked immediately. "Try to find those special rocks Uncle Thomas wrote about." After breakfast, Eliza promised, her own curiosity now fully engaged. "And I think we should take another look at that sea chest in daylight." The stone building seemed less mysterious in morning sunlight, though no less remarkable in its contents. The sea chest remained as they had left it, It's ancient wood bearing the marks of centuries at sea before its final resting place on this island. Eliza photographed everything meticulously: the chest, the research materials, the artifacts on their velvet trays. Whatever happened next, she wanted a complete record of this extraordinary discovery. "Look at this, Mom," Noah called, pointing to a framed map on the wall she hadn't noticed during their first examination. "It's the island, but with all these weird symbols." The map was clearly hand-drawn, the paper yellowed with age. It showed Henderson Island in remarkable detail, including topographical features that would have been difficult to survey in the 1700s, without modern equipment. Superimposed over the island's outline was an intricate pattern of lines, symbols, and notations that resembled astronomical calculations. "Your uncle believed this was Eliza Henderson's original map of the island," a voice said from the doorway, startling all three of them. Jack Winters stood silhouetted against the morning light, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. "Sorry to surprise you," he added, stepping into the building. "I brought some additional supplies I thought you might need. Saw the door open and figured you'd discovered Thomas's research sanctuary." "You knew about this place?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Jack nodded, setting down his bag. "I helped him build it about 15 years ago. Thomas wanted a secure, climate-controlled space for the artifacts and documents he was uncovering." He gestured toward the sea chest, "including that remarkable piece of history." "Why didn't you mention this yesterday?" Eliza demanded. "Wasn't my place," Jack said simply. Thomas was intensely private about his research. Said it had to be a Henderson who discovered the truth, that it was somehow tied to family birthright. I respected his wishes. Eliza studied Jack's weathered face, searching for deception, but finding only straightforward honesty. "So you know what he was looking for all these years?" "Pieces of it," Jack acknowledged. He shared some of his theories, especially in later years when he needed help with the physical work of excavating certain areas. He moved to the map Noah had discovered. This was his most prized possession, allegedly drawn by Eliza Henderson himself as a guide to the island's secret. "And what is that secret, exactly?" Eliza asked. "My uncle's notes mention a treasure, but they're frustratingly vague on specifics." Jack's expression grew more serious. Thomas believed the traditional story of Captain Eliza Henderson was almost entirely false. According to his research, Eliza wasn't simply a pirate who preyed on merchant shipping for personal gain. He was working as a privateer for certain powerful colonial interests who were secretly opposing British economic policies decades before the Revolution. This revelation shifted Eliza's understanding yet again. "So the treasure isn't just gold and jewels, though there's likely plenty of that," Jack confirmed. Thomas believed Eliza was entrusted with documents that would have been politically explosive, evidence of early colonial plans for economic independence. Lists of prominent citizens secretly funding resistance activities. Perhaps even correspondence with foreign powers willing to support an eventual break from England. "Historical dynamite," Eliza murmured, the academic significance dawning on her. If true, such documents would transform understanding of the colonial period, pushing the origins of American independence movements back decades earlier than conventional history recognized. "Which explains the elaborate security measures," Jack continued. "Eliza couldn't risk this material falling into British hands, but it was too valuable to the colonial cause to destroy. So he hid it where only a trusted descendant could ever recover it." The twins had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. "So there really is a treasure map?" Liam asked, pointing to the framed chart. "Not exactly," Jack explained. "Eliza was too clever for something so obvious. According to your uncle's theory, the island itself is the map. The stone formations around the island aren't random, they're markers, aligned with celestial positions that would only make sense to someone with Eliza's particular knowledge of navigation and astronomy." And Uncle Thomas figured out the alignment? Noah asked. Jack nodded. After 20 years of study, he believed he had. His last notes indicate he was waiting for the spring equinox to confirm his calculations. A shadow passed over his face. That was just before his heart attack. What did he discover? Eliza pressed, sensing Jack knew more than he was revealing. The fisherman hesitated. He never told me specifically. But the day before he died, he called me on the radio, more excited than I'd ever heard him. Said he needed to show me something remarkable. By the time I arrived the next morning, Jack's voice trailed off. He was gone, Eliza finished softly. An uncomfortable silence filled the stone building, broken finally by Liam's practical question. So how do we find what Uncle Thomas found? The equinox is already past. Jack considered this. The astronomical alignment he was tracking happens only once a year, but Thomas made detailed notes about the stone formations and their positions. With those, we might be able to reconstruct his findings. Eliza made a quick decision. First, I want to try opening that sea chest. If it contains Isaiah's journal or maps, they might provide the information we need without waiting another year. They returned their attention to the ancient sea chest with its puzzle lock of movable brass rings. Each ring was inscribed with letters, numbers, and astronomical symbols, all heavily tarnished by time. Your uncle never attempted to open it, Jack explained. He felt it should remain sealed until he had completed his research, to preserve the contents in their original context. Eliza studied the mechanism closely, her mind working through the possibilities. If Isaiah designed this lock, he would have used a combination that only a Henderson with the right knowledge could deduce. Something from family history, Noah suggested. Or from navigation, Liam added. Jack said he was an astronomy expert. Eliza turned to her uncle's notes, searching for clues. Among his papers, she found detailed drawings of the lock mechanism, with annotations about the symbols and possible combinations he had considered. One page contained a series of calculations based on the Henderson family's ancestral home coordinates in Portsmouth, combined with the astronomical position of stars on a specific date. I think he figured it out, she said, examining the final calculation. These numbers correspond to positions on the lock rings. He converted the latitude and longitude of the Portsmouth shipyard to degrees and minutes, then adjusted them based on the position of Polaris on the date Henderson Island was first recorded on navigation charts. Following her uncle's notes, Eliza carefully turned each brass ring to align the appropriate symbols. The ancient mechanism was stiff with age, requiring delicate but firm pressure. As the final ring clicked into place, a faint metallic sound emanated from within the lock. It worked, Jack breathed, genuine surprise evident in his voice. With extreme care, Eliza lifted the chest's lid. Years of conservation work in museums had taught her the fragility of ancient materials when exposed to modern air and handling. The hinges creaked in protest, but held as the lid slowly rose to reveal the chest's interior. The contents were protected by a heavy oilcloth covering, remarkably well preserved. Eliza gently lifted this barrier to reveal stacks of leather document folios, small wooden boxes, and several sealed metal containers designed to protect contents from moisture. Amazing preservation, she murmured, carefully lifting the top folio. Inside were ship's papers, logbooks, and manifests, all documenting the legitimate trading activities of Isaiah Henderson before his turn to piracy. These alone were historically significant, providing insight into colonial maritime commerce. The second folio contained something far more valuable: letters bearing the signatures of prominent colonial figures, discussing in coded language what could only be described as early revolutionary sentiments. The dates on these documents, 1720 to 1723, placed them nearly 50 years before the commonly accepted beginnings of organized resistance to British rule. This rewrites history, Eliza said softly, carefully returning the letters to their protective covering. Isaiah wasn't just a pirate. He was safeguarding evidence of an organized independence movement decades earlier than historians have recognized. Beneath the folios lay several small wooden boxes. The first contained gold coins of various origins, Spanish doubloons, English guineas, French louis d'or, true pirate's treasure, but almost secondary to the historical documents. The second box held gemstones, diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, still brilliant despite their centuries of concealment. But it was the sealed metal container at the very bottom of the chest that proved most revelatory. Inside was a smaller journal than the one Eliza had found in the cottage, its leather binding intact despite its age. The first page bore an inscription in the same handwriting: "My final testament, to be discovered only by a true Henderson who has proven worthy through perseverance and intellect. Herein lies the truth of my activities and the location of the greater treasure, which is not gold or jewels, but something far more precious to our future nation." Eliza carefully paged through this second journal, finding detailed accounts of Isaiah Henderson's secret work with colonial leaders, planning early resistance to British economic policies. The final pages contained what they had been seeking: specific directions to what Isaiah called the true repository, a hidden chamber constructed somewhere on the island to house the bulk of his documentary evidence. According to the journal, the stone markers around the island formed a complex astronomical calculator that, when properly understood, would reveal the chamber's location. Isaiah had designed the system specifically to ensure that only someone with knowledge of both Henderson family history and advanced navigational astronomy could decipher it, a true intellectual heir rather than merely a blood relation. Uncle Thomas solved it, Eliza realized, connecting the journal's description with her uncle's final notes. The spring equinox alignment. He found the hidden chamber just before he died. Jack nodded slowly. That would explain his excitement that day. But if he found it, why isn't there any record in his notes? Maybe he didn't have time to document it, Noah suggested. If he had his heart attack right after. Or maybe he did document it, but not here, Liam added. Maybe there's another hiding place. Eliza considered this possibility. The lockbox in the kitchen cupboard only contained the key to this building. But there might be another hidden compartment somewhere in the cottage. They returned to the cottage with renewed purpose, conducting a methodical search for hidden spaces. The boys, with their smaller hands and natural curiosity, proved particularly adept at finding concealed panels and loose floorboards. It was Noah who made the discovery behind the wood stove in the main room. "Mom, there's something weird about this hearthstone." The large granite slab forming the base of the wood stove's hearth moved slightly when pressed in a certain way. With Jack's help, they shifted it aside to reveal a small cavity containing a waterproof document tube. Inside was a single page covered in her uncle's handwriting, dated March 16th, the day before his death. "I have found it. The repository chamber lies beneath the North Point cliff face, accessible only via the sea cave during low tide. Isaiah's genius in its construction is breathtaking. The entire entrance mechanism operates by tidal action and is invisible except during the precise alignment of sun and stars I calculated. Inside, beyond all expectation, I found not only the historical documents, but the personal journals of Isaiah's later life under his assumed identity. The truth is more remarkable than even I had theorized. Tomorrow, I will begin cataloging the contents. May whoever follows in my footsteps use this discovery wisely." Jack consulted his watch. "Low tide is in about 3 hours. If the sea cave is the one I'm thinking of, we should be able to access it then." As they prepared for this expedition, gathering flashlights, cameras, and climbing equipment from both their supplies and what Jack had brought, Eliza found herself torn between scholarly excitement and maternal concern. This adventure had already exceeded anything she had anticipated, when reluctantly accepting her inheritance. The historical significance of what they had found, and what they might yet discover, was immeasurable. Yet she was acutely aware of the responsibility of protecting both the physical artifacts and the historical narrative they represented. "What will you do with all this?" Jack asked quietly while the boys packed their backpacks with snacks and water bottles. "It's worth millions, both in monetary and historical terms." Eliza considered the question carefully. "The right thing," she finally answered. "Whatever that turns out to be." The trek to the north point of Henderson Island took longer than expected. Though the island was small, the terrain was challenging rocky outcroppings, dense patches of wind-stunted pines, and fields of beach grass concealing treacherous depressions in the ground. Jack led them along what had once been a path, but was now barely discernible among the island's wild growth. "Your uncle maintained a trail network for his research," Jack explained as they carefully navigated a steep section. "But nature reclaims quickly out here. No one's walked these paths since Thomas fell ill last winter." As they hiked, Eliza found herself studying the stone formations they passed with new understanding. What had initially appeared to be natural outcroppings now revealed subtle signs of human manipulation, stones positioned at precise angles to each other, markers with faint carvings worn by centuries of weather, and configurations that seemed to point toward astronomical alignments. Eliza Henderson wasn't just hiding treasure, she remarked to Jack as they paused to let the twins examine a particularly interesting rock formation. He was creating a massive puzzle across the entire island. Jack nodded. Thomas believed Isaiah was something of a polymath navigator, astronomer, engineer, and artist. The kind of Renaissance mind that could conceive of this elaborate system of markers and alignments. But why go to such lengths? Eliza wondered. Creating all this must have taken years. "According to your uncle's theory, Isaiah had two motivations," Jack replied. "First, protecting truly sensitive historical documents that could have endangered lives if discovered prematurely. Second." He hesitated. "What?" Eliza prompted. "Redemption," Jack said simply. Thomas believed Isaiah was seeking to atone for his years of piracy by preserving these materials for future generations. The treasure was never the point, it was the historical legacy he was protecting. This perspective shifted Eliza's understanding of her notorious ancestor. Not a simple pirate after all, but a complex figure navigating dangerous political waters during a pivotal time in American history, ultimately choosing to serve a greater purpose than self-enrichment. They reached the northern cliffs as the tide was beginning its retreat. Far below, the Atlantic crashed against the rocky shore, its power diminished but still formidable as the water level gradually descended. A narrow path zigzagged down the cliff face, clearly man-made though ancient in origin. "That's our way down," Jack said, securing a safety rope to a sturdy pine growing near the cliff edge. "The sea cave entrance should be visible once the tide drops another foot or so." Eliza assessed the path with motherly concern. "Is it safe for the boys?" "With proper precautions," Jack assured her. "We'll use harnesses and guide ropes. I've descended more dangerous cliffs for my lobster traps." Liam and Noah, far from being intimidated, could barely contain their excitement at the prospect of the climb. "We did harder routes at the climbing gym in Portland," Liam reminded his mother. "And we'll have ropes and everything." Eliza relented, recognizing that this was precisely the kind of adventure the twins had been missing since their father's death. Michael Henderson had been an outdoorsman who regularly took the boys hiking, camping, and rock climbing. After his loss, such activities had been set aside in the struggle of daily survival. As Jack distributed climbing harnesses and helmets from his pack, Eliza realized he had come prepared specifically for this expedition, suggesting he had known more about her uncle's discoveries than he initially revealed. "You expected we'd need to reach the sea cave today," she said. "Not a question but an observation." Jack's weathered face registered a moment of chagrin. "I hoped," he admitted. When I heard you'd found Thomas's research sanctuary, I thought you might piece together what he had discovered. The family connection. It matters. Thomas believed that strongly. Why didn't you just tell us everything from the beginning? Eliza asked, helping Noah adjust his harness. Would you have believed me? Jack countered gently. A local fisherman telling you about pirate treasure and hidden chambers? You needed to discover it yourself, follow the same path Thomas did. That's what he would have wanted. Eliza couldn't argue with this logic. She would indeed have dismissed such tales without the evidence they had uncovered in the past 24 hours. The descent to the shoreline was challenging but manageable with Jack's expert guidance. The twins navigated the narrow path with surprising agility, their natural athleticism overcoming any fears they might have harbored. Eliza followed more cautiously, acutely aware of both the physical danger and the historical significance of what they were attempting. At the base of the cliff, a narrow strip of rocky beach emerged as the tide receded. Jack led them about 50 yards along the shore until they reached what appeared to be a fissure in the cliff face, a dark opening barely wide enough for an adult to pass through sideways. The sea cave, Jack confirmed, shining his powerful flashlight into the darkness. It extends about 30 feet into the cliff, according to local lore, though few have explored it due to the tidal access restrictions. Will it flood while we're inside? Noah asked, a hint of apprehension finally breaking through his excitement. We have a 3-hour window before the tide turns, Jack assured him. More than enough time if we're efficient. One by one, they squeezed through the narrow entrance into the sea cave beyond. The interior opened into a surprisingly large chamber, its walls glistening with moisture, the floor a mixture of sand and smooth stones polished by centuries of tidal action. Where's the repository entrance? Liam asked, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. Jack directed his flashlight beam toward the back of the cave. According to your uncle's notes, it should be along the rear wall, but visible only when aligned with specific markers. Eliza studied the wall carefully. At first glance, it appeared to be solid rock, unremarkable except for the usual striations and colorations of coastal stone. But as her eyes adjusted to the interplay of light and shadow, she noticed something unusual, a section of wall where the natural pattern seemed just slightly too regular. There, she said, pointing. Those markings aren't random geological formations. Jack moved closer, his flashlight revealing what Eliza had spotted, a series of faint lines etched into the stone, forming what might be a geometric pattern, or perhaps letters in some archaic script. Your uncle's notes mentioned something like this, Jack confirmed. He believed it was a locking mechanism that responded to specific pressure points and could only be activated when the tide was at precisely the right level. Like a combination lock that only works at certain times, Noah observed, moving closer to examine the markings. Exactly, Jack agreed. According to Thomas, the changing water pressure from the tides actually powers the mechanism through a series of hydraulic channels built into the cliff face. Impossible, Eliza protested. That kind of engineering wouldn't have been available in the 1720s. Not widely, Jack conceded, but not impossible for someone with the right knowledge. Eliza Henderson traveled extensively before turning to piracy. Thomas found evidence he had spent time in both Venice and parts of the Ottoman Empire, where hydraulic mechanisms had been in use for centuries. Eliza studied the wall more carefully, tracing the faint lines with her fingertips. So how do we activate it? Jack consulted a small waterproof notebook he extracted from his pocket. Thomas wrote that the key points follow a constellation pattern Polaris and the surrounding stars of Ursa Minor. The Little Dipper, Liam identified immediately. We studied constellations in science class. Following Jack's directions, Eliza pressed specific points on the wall in a sequence mimicking the stars of Ursa Minor. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, a barely audible clicking sound emanated from within the rock, followed by a faint hissing. Slowly, a section of the wall recessed inward and slid aside, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. Cool, dry air flowed from the opening air that hadn't circulated for centuries until Thomas Henderson had rediscovered this chamber months ago. Remarkable engineering, Eliza breathed, genuinely impressed by her ancestors' ingenuity. The mechanism has survived 300 years in a marine environment. Isaiah understood that standard locks and hinges would corrode in these conditions, Jack explained. So he designed a system that used the natural elements to its advantage rather than fighting against them. The passageway was narrow but tall enough for them to walk upright. Jack led the way, followed by the twins, with Eliza bringing up the rear. The walls were smooth, clearly carved with tools rather than formed naturally, and occasionally marked with the same astronomical symbols they had seen on the island's stone markers. After about 20 feet, the passage opened into a chamber that drew gasps from all of them. Unlike the rough sea cave, this space had been meticulously constructed. The walls were lined with fitted stone, the floor was level and paved with slate, and recesses had been carved into the walls to serve as shelves and storage areas. Most remarkably, the chamber was illuminated by a subtle bluish light whose source wasn't immediately apparent. As their eyes adjusted, Eliza realized the illumination came from small apertures in the ceiling that channeled daylight through what must be an ingenious system of reflective surfaces. Natural lighting, she marveled. He created a system that would provide light without fire or fuel. The chamber contained several wooden tables and chests, all showing the effects of time but remarkably preserved in the stable environment Isaiah Henderson had engineered. The tables held navigational instruments, maps, and documents carefully arranged as if for ongoing study. The scene suggested that Isaiah had used this chamber as a secret workshop and archive, a place where he could continue his work hidden from the world. In the center of the room stood what appeared to be a drafting table, larger than the others and covered with rolled charts and bound manuscripts. A wooden chair was positioned before it, and atop the table lay a journal much like the ones they had already discovered, but larger and more elaborately bound. Eliza approached this central artifact with reverence, aware that they were likely the first people to view these items, since her uncle's brief rediscovery months ago, and before him, possibly only Isaiah Henderson himself. The journal was labeled simply, "The Final Account of Isaiah Henderson, 1724 to 1762. 1762, Eliza noted with surprise. That's nearly 40 years after he supposedly disappeared at sea. Thomas was right, Jack said softly. Isaiah survived and lived out his life under an assumed identity. With extreme care, Eliza opened the journal to its first page. The handwriting matched that of the earlier journals, though it showed subtle changes that might indicate aging or perhaps the injury mentioned in previous entries. I commenced this final record in my 58th year, the text began, having lived these past 4 decades as Thomas Henderson, shipwright and respectable citizen of Portsmouth. The irony of assuming my brother's identity after arranging my own death has not escaped me. Poor Nathaniel lost at sea in truth, while I, the notorious Captain Henderson, flourish in domestic tranquility under his name. The journal detailed Isaiah's transformation from pirate captain to respected craftsman, his marriage to Elizabeth, who had known his true identity and helped maintain the deception, and his continued secret work supporting the early independence movement in the colonies. What's remarkable, Eliza observed as she carefully paged through the journal, is that he maintained this hidden chamber as an archive and workspace throughout his later life. These entries span decades, suggesting he regularly traveled to the island to update his records and continue his work. Look at this, Liam called from one of the side tables where he'd been examining a stack of maps. It's designs for ships, but they're different from regular sailing vessels. Eliza joined her son, examining what proved to be naval engineering drawings far ahead of their time. The vessels incorporated innovations in hull design, rigging, and armaments that wouldn't become standard for another century. Isaiah was designing warships, she realized. Vessels that could outmaneuver the British Navy. And these, Noah added from another table, look like codes and cipher systems. The documents Noah had discovered were indeed detailed encryption methods designed for secure communication between colonial leaders' systems, sophisticated enough to have baffled British intelligence of the era. As they continued exploring the chamber's contents, the true scope of Eliza Henderson's contribution to early American independence efforts became clear. Far from being a simple pirate, he had been a visionary working decades ahead of the recognized revolutionary period, establishing networks, developing technologies, and preserving crucial documentation that would later inform the founding of the nation. This changes everything we thought we knew about colonial resistance, Eliza said, her historian's mind racing with the implications. The traditional narrative places the organized independence movement in the 1760s and 70s. But these materials prove it was active as early as the 1720s. Uncle Thomas understood the significance, Jack confirmed. That's why he was so careful, so methodical in his research. He knew this wasn't just about finding treasure, it was about rewriting history. Among the wealth of historical materials, they also discovered the more conventional treasure. One might expect from a successful pirate several sea chests containing gold coins, gemstones, and precious artifacts from around the known world of the 18th century. The value was substantial, yet it seemed almost incidental compared to the historical significance of the documents. Isaiah converted most of his piracy proceeds to fund the early resistance, Eliza noted, reading from a ledger that detailed disbursements to various coded recipients. What remains here appears to be a reserve fund intended to finance future revolutionary activities as needed. As they cataloged the chamber's contents, Eliza felt a growing sense of responsibility. This discovery wasn't just a windfall for her family. It was a historical legacy with national implications. The decisions she made about these materials would affect how future generations understood their country's origins. We need to document everything properly before we remove anything, she told the others. Jack, how much time do we have before the tide turns? About an hour, he confirmed after checking his watch. Enough time to photograph and catalog the major items, but we'll need to return tomorrow for a more thorough inventory. They worked efficiently, using their phones to photograph documents and artifacts, with Eliza making careful notes about the arrangement and apparent significance of various items. The twins, despite their youth, approached the task with surprising seriousness, sensing the historical importance of their activities. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Eliza noticed something they had overlooked. A small wooden box tucked into a wall recess near the entrance, distinct from the other artifacts in both style and apparent age. Unlike the 18th century items that dominated the chamber, this box appeared relatively modern, its wood not yet darkened by centuries. I think this was Uncle Thomas's, she said, carefully lifting the box from its niche. Inside was a letter sealed in a waterproof pouch, addressed simply, "To the Henderson who follows." The handwriting was unmistakably her uncle's. We should take this with us, Eliza decided. Read it when we're safely back at the cottage. They secured the hidden chamber, verifying that the hydraulic mechanism could be activated from the inside to reseal the entrance. As they made their way back through the sea cave and up the cliff path, the tide was already beginning to turn, gradually reclaiming the rocky shore. The climb was more challenging than the descent, especially as fatigue began to set in after their remarkable explorations. But Jack's experienced guidance ensured they all reached the top safely, emerging once again onto the windswept northern point of Henderson Island as afternoon light bathed the landscape in a golden glow. It's like seeing the island with new eyes, Eliza remarked as they rested before beginning the hike back to the cottage. Every stone, every feature might have been placed or modified by Isaiah as part of his grand design. A legacy hidden in plain sight, Jack agreed. waiting for the right person to understand it. Back at the cottage, after a simple meal that tasted exceptional after their exertions, Eliza finally opened the letter her uncle had left in the chamber. The twins gathered close, their usual energy tempered by the day's discoveries and the solemnity of this final communication from a relative they had never known. To the Henderson who follows, Thomas had written, "If you are reading this, you have shown the persistence and insight necessary to uncover what I spent my life seeking, the true legacy of our ancestor, Eliza Henderson. What you have found is not merely treasure, though its monetary value is considerable. You have discovered a historical truth that has remained hidden for centuries. Eliza Henderson was not simply a pirate who abandoned his criminal ways, as I once believed. He was a visionary who recognized the inevitable conflict between the American colonies and Britain, decades before most colonial leaders. The materials he preserved in his hidden repository document the earliest organized efforts toward American independence, efforts that have been lost to conventional history. I have spent my final months cataloging and preserving these materials, but the task of bringing them properly to light falls to you. This responsibility is not to be taken lightly. These artifacts and documents belong not just to the Henderson family, but to the nation whose early history they illuminate. Whatever you decide, remember that Eliza did not create this elaborate puzzle merely to hide his wealth. He created it to ensure that his true legacy, his contribution to the founding principles of America, would survive for future generations. The island is yours now, as are its secrets. Use them wisely, with respect for both our family heritage and our national history. With faith in your judgment, Thomas Henderson." Eliza carefully refolded the letter, momentarily overwhelmed by the responsibility it represented. When she had reluctantly signed the inheritance papers for what she'd believed was a worthless island, she could never have imagined the true nature of the legacy she was accepting. "What will we do with everything, Mom?" Noah asked, his young face serious in the lamplight. It was the question that had been forming in Eliza's mind throughout their explorations. The discovery represented wealth that could transform their precarious financial situation overnight. The gold and gemstones alone would sell for millions, resolving their debts and securing their future. Yet the historical materials were priceless in a different way, irreplaceable documents that could reshape understanding of America's revolutionary period. They belonged in museums and research institutions where historians could study them properly. "We'll do what's right," Eliza said finally, echoing her earlier words to Jack, but now with greater conviction. The historical materials need to be properly preserved and studied. That means working with major museums and historical societies. "But the treasure?" Liam asked, the practical concern of a child who had witnessed his family's financial struggles since losing his father. "Some of it will need to remain with the historical collection to maintain its integrity," Eliza explained. "But yes, we'll keep a portion enough to secure our future and honor Uncle Thomas's wishes that the Henderson family continue to steward this legacy." Jack, who had been quietly listening to this exchange, nodded approval. Thomas would be satisfied with that decision. He never sought personal gain from his research, only recognition of the truth. As darkness settled over Henderson Island, Eliza found herself standing on the cottage porch, gazing at stars that seemed impossibly bright away from city lights. The same stars, she realized, that Eliza Henderson had used to create his elaborate navigational puzzle, fixed points of reference in a changing world. What had appeared to be a burden, an unwanted inheritance requiring time she couldn't spare, had revealed itself as an extraordinary gift. Not just the material treasure, though that would certainly transform their lives, but the connection to a remarkable ancestor whose story had remained hidden for centuries. Moreover, the discovery had awakened something in Eliza that had been dormant since Michael's death, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The historian's passion that had defined her academic career before marriage and motherhood had led her in another direction, had resurged with unexpected force. In uncovering Eliza Henderson's legacy, she had perhaps rediscovered part of herself as well. And in sharing this adventure with her sons, she had given them something equally valuable, a connection to their heritage and a demonstration that life still held wonder and possibility even after profound loss. The island was no longer worthless in her eyes. It was priceless, not for the gold hidden within its rocky shores, but for the legacy of ingenuity, courage, and foresight it represented. A legacy she was now determined to honor, not just as a Henderson, but as a guardian of history. Inside the cottage, the twins were already asleep, exhausted by the day's adventures. Tomorrow they would return to the hidden chamber for more systematic documentation. Then decisions would need to be made about contacting authorities, museums, and historical societies. The path ahead would be complex, but for the first time in many months, Eliza faced the future with something beyond resignation, a sense of purpose and even excitement about possibilities yet to unfold. Dawn broke over Henderson Island with a clarity that seemed to mirror Eliza's newly resolved purpose. She'd slept deeply for the first time in months, the combination of physical exertion and emotional revelation having exhausted her usual insomnia. The twins were already awake, their excited chatter from the kitchen heralding the beginning of another day of discovery. "We need a systematic approach today," Eliza explained over a breakfast of granola bars and fruit. "Proper documentation of everything in the repository chamber before Jack returns this afternoon." "Are we bringing anything back with us?" Liam asked, the practical question reflecting his father's methodical nature. Eliza nodded. "Uncle Thomas's notes and the most fragile documents that need immediate conservation. The rest should remain secure where it is until we can arrange proper archaeological and historical expertise." They set out earlier than the previous day, wanting to maximize their time in the hidden chamber before the tide restricted access again. The island seemed different, now no longer an isolated, worthless inheritance but a landscape rich with meaning and purpose, each feature potentially part of Eliza Henderson's elaborate design. "I've been thinking about why Eliza created such a complex system," Noah said as they hiked along the now familiar path to the northern cliffs. "Why not just a simple hidden room with a key?" "Because he was protecting something truly important," Eliza replied. "And he needed to ensure it would only be found by someone who understood its significance." "Like a test," Liam suggested, "to make sure whoever found it was smart enough to handle it responsibly." "Exactly," Jack confirmed, having joined them at the cottage that morning. Eliza wasn't just hiding treasure, he was selecting his heir. Not necessarily by blood, but by intellect and character. This perspective shed new light on their discovery. They weren't simply lucky beneficiaries of a valuable inheritance. They had passed a test designed by an ancestor nearly 3 centuries before, proving themselves worthy custodians of his legacy. The descent to the sea cave was easier the second time, their bodies having adapted to the unusual demands of cliff climbing and their minds unburdened by the uncertainty that had accompanied their first expedition. When they reached the hidden chamber, the mysterious blue illumination welcomed them, the ancient engineering still functioning flawlessly after centuries of isolation. "We should divide the work," Eliza suggested. "Jack and I will document the historical documents and maps. Liam and Noah, you can photograph and catalog the artifacts on the side tables, but remember no handling anything unnecessarily." The boys nodded solemnly, understanding the responsibility they had been entrusted with. Despite their youth, they had absorbed the significance of their discovery and approached their task with surprising maturity. As Eliza carefully examined the central journal, she found details of Isaiah's later life that filled important gaps in their understanding. After faking his death and assuming his brother Nathaniel's identity, Isaiah had indeed established himself as a respected shipbuilder in Portsmouth. But his maritime expertise served a deeper purpose. He designed vessels, specifically engineered to outmaneuver British warships. Vessels that would later form the nucleus of America's first naval forces during the Revolution. "Listen to this," she called to Jack, who was photographing a series of coded letters. "My latest design, ostensibly a merchant vessel for the Harrington Company, incorporates the modified keel structure and sail arrangement that will give a 30% advantage in windward sailing over any Royal Navy ship of similar size. Governor Wentworth has arranged for 3 such vessels to be constructed under different builders to avoid suspicion." "That's dated 1742, Jack noted. "More than 30 years before the Revolution. The preparations were happening much earlier than history has recognized," Eliza confirmed. "Isaiah and others like him were laying groundwork decades in advance." In another section of the journal, Isaiah detailed his creation of Henderson Island's elaborate security system. "The chamber's hydraulic mechanism draws inspiration from devices I observed in Constantinople, though I have improved upon their design to account for our harsher climate. The astronomical alignments ensure that only one who understands both navigation and the Henderson family history could ever locate the entrance. Some might consider such measures excessive, but the documents contained herein could be ruinous to our cause if discovered prematurely." As the morning progressed, they uncovered further evidence of Isaiah's pivotal role in early independence efforts. Maps detailing British military positions throughout the colonies, reports from a network of informants within colonial governments, and detailed analyses of economic vulnerabilities that could be exploited to pressure London for concessions. He wasn't just a supporter of independence, Eliza realized. He was one of its architects. Meanwhile, the twins had discovered something equally remarkable, a collection of small mechanical devices, whose purpose wasn't immediately obvious. Brass gears, lenses, and calibrated dials suggested precision instruments, but their configuration matched nothing in modern use. "Mom, look at these," Noah called, pointing to the devices without touching them. "There are drawings next to them with astronomical symbols." Eliza examined the parchment diagrams accompanying the instruments. "These appear to be specialized navigational tools," she concluded after studying the detailed notations. Isaiah designed them to calculate longitude more accurately than was possible with conventional methods of his era. "That would have given colonial ships a significant advantage," Jack observed, "particularly in unfamiliar waters or adverse conditions." By midday, they had documented the majority of the chamber's contents, creating a comprehensive digital record of their discoveries. The historical importance was undeniable. These materials would necessitate a significant revision of early American history, pushing the origins of organized independence movements back several decades and highlighting the contributions of figures previously overlooked. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Eliza noticed a small alcove they had overlooked during their initial exploration, partially concealed behind one of the storage cabinets. It contained what appeared to be personal items rather than historical artifacts, a woman's locket containing a miniature portrait, several handwritten letters with wax seals still intact, and a small leather-bound book that proved to be a private diary rather than an official record. Elizabeth's diary, Eliza realized, opening the book carefully to reveal delicate feminine handwriting. Isaiah's wife. These must have been precious to him. The diary provided a more intimate perspective on Isaiah Henderson's transformation from pirate to patriot, seen through the eyes of the woman who had shared his secret and supported his clandestine work. Elizabeth's entries revealed a relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose, unusual for the era. She had not merely been Isaiah's wife, but his intellectual partner, assisting with codes, maintaining correspondence with their network of allies, and occasionally traveling to deliver sensitive messages when Isaiah could not risk being recognized. She was as much a revolutionary as he was, Eliza noted, deeply moved by this discovery of a female ancestor who had defied the limitations of her time. Yet history would never have recorded her contribution. Jack checked his watch. We should head back soon. The tide will turn in about an hour. Before leaving, they secured the chamber carefully, ensuring that all items were returned to their original positions. The hydraulic mechanism functioned perfectly when activated from the inside. The stone door sliding closed with barely a sound, a testament to Eliza Henderson's engineering genius. The climb back up the cliff was arduous but uneventful, and they returned to the cottage with their documentation complete, and a handful of the most fragile documents safely secured in waterproof containers Jack had brought for this purpose. What happens next? Liam asked as they gathered around the kitchen table, examining the photographs and notes they had compiled. Eliza considered the question carefully. The past 2 days had transformed not just their understanding of family history, but their entire future. The decision she made now would have far-reaching consequences. First, we need expert help, she decided. The historical materials require professional conservation and study. I have colleagues at the Maritime History Institute in Boston who can assemble the right team: archaeologists, historians, document preservationists. And the treasure? Noah asked directly. The gold and gemstones? Some should remain with the collection to maintain its historical context, Eliza explained. But yes, as Uncle Thomas intended, a portion will come to us as the Henderson heirs. Enough to secure our future and honor our responsibility to this legacy. Jack nodded approval. Thomas would consider that the right balance. He never sought personal enrichment from his research, only recognition of the historical truth. As they prepared to leave Henderson Island later that afternoon, Eliza found herself lingering on the cottage porch, gazing out at the landscape that had seemed so desolate just days before. Now she saw it with new eyes, a carefully designed puzzle, created by an ancestor of remarkable vision and intelligence, preserved through centuries for a purpose that transcended mere wealth. We'll be coming back, won't we, Mom? Noah asked, joining her on the porch. Many times, Eliza assured him, placing an arm around his shoulders. This place is part of who we are now. The weeks that followed their discovery unfolded with dizzying speed. Eliza's contacts at the Maritime History Institute responded with appropriate excitement to her carefully worded description of their findings, dispatching a team of experts to Henderson Island within days. The initial assessment confirmed everything they had documented, and more. The historical significance of Eliza Henderson's repository was even greater than they had first realized. This collection will revolutionize our understanding of pre-revolutionary organization in the colonies, Dr. Eleanor Wright, the Institute's chief historian, explained during their first conference call. The level of sophistication in these early networks, the international connections Eliza established, the technological innovations he introduced, it's unprecedented. The financial aspects were handled with equal expertise. An independent appraiser valued the collection's historical artifacts in the millions, while the gold, gemstones, and other treasures represented a separate fortune. As Eliza had decided, a significant portion of the material treasure was kept with the historical collection to maintain its integrity, while the remainder was placed in trust for the Henderson family. You'll never have to worry about the boat repair shop again, their financial advisor explained with a smile. The trust is structured to provide for your immediate needs while preserving the principal for future generations. 6 months after their discovery, Eliza stood in the Maritime History Institute's Grand Exhibition Hall, surrounded by carefully displayed artifacts from Eliza Henderson's repository. The centerpiece of the exhibition, titled The Secret Architect of Independence, Eliza Henderson and America's Hidden Revolutionary History, featured the captain's sea chest, navigational instruments, and selected documents that chronicled his remarkable double life. The opening had drawn national attention, with historians, journalists, and government officials gathering to witness the unveiling of materials that would necessitate a significant revision of American revolutionary history. Liam and Noah, uncomfortably handsome in suits that still felt strange after years of casual attire, stood proudly beside their mother as she addressed the assembled guests. When I reluctantly inherited Henderson Island, I thought I was receiving a worthless piece of land that would only add to my family's burdens, Eliza began, her voice steady despite her natural aversion to public speaking. Instead, I received a priceless legacy, not just of material treasure, but of historical truth and family purpose. She gestured to the exhibition around them. Eliza Henderson created an elaborate puzzle spanning centuries, designed to ensure his work would be discovered only when it could be properly understood and preserved. In doing so, he demonstrated extraordinary foresight and faith in future generations. As applause filled the hall, Eliza caught sight of Jack Winters standing quietly near the back of the crowd. The fisherman had become an unexpected partner in their journey, his knowledge of Henderson Island and its secrets proving invaluable to the research team. Though he had declined any financial compensation for his role in the discovery, he had accepted a position as the island's official caretaker, a role that suited his preference for solitude and his deep respect for the Henderson legacy. Later that evening, as the formal reception continued in another part of the institute, Eliza found a quiet moment with her sons in the exhibition hall. The display cases glowed softly in the dimmed lighting, the artifacts they contained somehow more impressive in the hushed atmosphere. "Dad would have loved this," Liam said suddenly, breaking the contemplative silence. "All the history and the mystery. He would have been the first one down that cliff," Noah agreed with a small smile. "Probably without even using the ropes." The mention of Michael Henderson brought the expected pang of grief, but now it was tempered by something new, a sense of continuity and purpose that extended beyond their immediate loss. Michael was part of the Henderson lineage that stretched back to Isaiah and beyond, a chain of individuals who had faced challenges, made difficult choices, and persevered. "Your father is part of this story too," Eliza told her sons, drawing them close. "Everything we are, everything we do, builds on those who came before us." Isaiah understood that when he created his elaborate puzzle, he was reaching across time to connect with his descendants. "Do you think he would be proud of us?" Noah asked, his 12-year-old face suddenly vulnerable beneath its usual confidence. "I know he would," Eliza assured him. "We did exactly what he hoped his descendants would do. We solved the puzzle, protected the legacy, and ensured the truth would be preserved." The exhibition marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Henderson family, not an ending. The island that had once seemed worthless had become the centerpiece of an ongoing research project, with archaeologists and historians making regular expeditions to study Isaiah's stone markers and astronomical alignments. The cottage had been carefully restored based on Thomas Henderson's detailed notes, and plans were underway to create a small research center where scholars could study the island's unique features. For Eliza, the discovery had rekindled her passion for historical research. The Maritime History Institute had offered her a position as special curator for the Henderson collection, allowing her to combine scholarly work with the practical responsibility of overseeing her ancestors' legacy. After years of setting aside her academic interests to focus on survival following Michael's death, she had found her way back to work that fulfilled her intellectually while honoring her family heritage. The twins, too, had been transformed by their island adventure. Their experience deciphering Isaiah's puzzle had awakened interests that shaped their educational paths, Noah developing a fascination with engineering and mechanical systems, Liam drawn to navigation and maritime history. Both carried themselves with a new confidence born of having participated in a discovery of genuine historical significance. 1 year after signing the inheritance papers for what she had believed was a worthless island, Eliza Henderson stood on the deck of a small research vessel approaching Henderson Island. The autumn sunlight gilded the rocky shores and wind-sculpted vegetation, revealing beauty she had been too preoccupied to notice during their first visit. "It looks different now," Liam observed, joining her at the railing. "We're different," Eliza replied. "We see it through new eyes." The research team accompanying them was equipped to conduct the first comprehensive archaeological survey of the island's stone markers. Using advanced technology to map the astronomical alignments Isaiah had incorporated into his design. Jack Winters waited on the small dock, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile as the boat approached. "Welcome back to Henderson Island," he called as they disembarked. Or as the research team has started calling it, Isaiah's puzzle. The name seemed fitting, acknowledging both the island's physical nature as an elaborate astronomical calculation and its deeper purpose as a test of character and intellect designed to identify worthy heirs across centuries. Isaiah Henderson had created not just a hiding place for treasure, but a bridge across time, connecting him to descendants who shared his values and vision. As they made their way up the familiar path to the cottage, now renovated as a comfortable research station, Eliza reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with her reluctant acceptance of an apparently worthless inheritance. What had seemed a burden had revealed itself as a gift beyond price, not just the material treasure that had secured her family's financial future, but the legacy of purpose and connection that had healed something broken in all of them after Michael's death. The island that had once represented nothing but unwanted responsibility now embodied possibility, adventure, and continuity. Isaiah Henderson's extraordinary vision had reached across nearly 3 centuries to touch his descendants at precisely the moment they needed it most, offering not just material security, but a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Eliza stood with her sons on the cottage porch, watching the same celestial dance that had inspired Isaiah's elaborate astronomical puzzle. The stars emerging in the darkening sky were the same fixed points he had used to create his system of markers and alignments, permanent references in a constantly changing world. "Do you think there are more secrets to discover here?" Noah asked, his young face illuminated by the fading light. "Undoubtedly," Eliza replied. "Isaiah spent decades creating this puzzle. We've only just begun to understand its complexity." "Then we'll keep exploring," Liam declared with quiet determination. "It's what Hendersons do." In that moment, Eliza recognized the true value of their inheritance. Beyond the gold and historical artifacts, Isaiah Henderson had bequeathed them a legacy of curiosity, persistence, and purpose, qualities that had defined the Henderson family for generations. The worthless island had revealed itself as the most valuable inheritance of all, a connection to their past that illuminated a path into their future. As night fell over Henderson Island, the stars shone with remarkable clarity, just as they had when Isaiah Henderson had used them to create his elaborate puzzle 3 centuries before, a testament to vision that transcended time, connecting generations in a shared legacy of discovery, courage, and purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.